Welcome to Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. It is the last Wednesday of the month of October 2017. We are here this evening to talk about the astrology of November 2017. And it's been a pretty crazy month, and we have more of it to follow. Before we jump into the actual material, and we have some very, I think, important material tonight, but before we jump into the material, I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things coming up. As many of you know, every year I do a workshop at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, and that's in the old growth forest of Central Oregon. And this is at Brighton Bush Hot Springs the weekend of January 5th, 6th, and 7th. And the registration on this is open. Several people I got emails have asked me about this already. The thing is that if you're interested in attending this usually does fill up. And so whether you're here at the coffee house tonight in Redmond or watching online, you can go to Brighton Bush, that's BREITENBUSH, brightonbush.com. And it's a magical retreat center in Central Oregon, and we will be looking at the astrology of the year ahead and looking at the charts of all the participants who attend as kind of the background curriculum of how to look at what's coming up. So it's a fun weekend. This is my, I think, 10th or 11th year of doing this, and it's an interesting and fun way to kick off the year. That's January 5th, 6th, and 7th. Then the following Thursday, let's see, 7th is a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's my calendaring system. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. January 11th, I will be giving a lecture at the Washington State Astrology Association, and you can find that online also, or on Facebook. Washington Astrologers is a good way to search for that. And I will be giving a Thursday night lecture again on the astrology of 2018, kind of like I do here once a month for the month ahead. I'll be doing it on that night for the entire year ahead of 2018. That is on the 11th, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 11th, 12th, 13th. On Saturday the 13th, I will be doing an all-day workshop, and that workshop will be on working with transits and some other techniques of doing chart readings. The information and write-up for that is online also. I'll talk more about that next month. Then on March 22nd through the 26th, we have NORWAC, the Northwest Astrology Conference, an annual event here in Seattle, and this will be my 30th or 31st NORWAC, at which I've spoken at probably about 25 of them. I will be speaking at this. There will be astrologers there and speakers from all over the world. It's a very fun event, and it's right in our backyard. And you can go for one day or the entire thing if you are interested. And the information here is at NORWAC, that's the Northwest Astrology Conference, norwac.net, and you can find out more information there. NORWAC is normally on Memorial Day weekend, but every 4 or 5 years, the astrology community holds an event called UAC, and UAC is the United Astrology Conference. And this year, UAC is being held on Memorial Day weekend in Chicago, and this will have 170 speakers from some 45 countries, and it's the largest astrology conference like this in the world. And you can find out more information by, again, going online to uacastrology.com. For those of you who are watching online, the link is over, where am I going to put it? There! Anyhow, so those are some of the things that I have coming up. For the adventurous amongst you, you can also hear me and about 75 other astrologers lecturing in Kolkata the 1st of February, and so I will be in India again this year. And that takes us up through next spring or next spring. So, enough there. So how's Jupiter in Scorpio treating you? All right, so a little bit of a review and an orientation as we go into the actual chart and information that we have. All the different planets move at their own rates and speed. From Earth's point of view, it looks like the sun goes through all 12 signs of the zodiac once a year. Yeah, we know it's really the Earth moving around the sun, but from Earth's point of view, it looks like the sun moves through the zodiac once a year. That's why we have 1 month of each of 12 signs throughout the year. We have entered into the time of year when the sun, from Earth's point of view, is in the sign of Scorpio. We got some Scorpio stuff to talk about. So right now we are in the time of year of Scorpio. By the time we get together next time, we will be pushing into Sagittarius, Thanksgiving time. But right now the sun has moved into Scorpio. You can see the chart here for October 25th, that would be tonight. And you can see the chart right now with the sun having just moved into Scorpio at 2 degrees of Scorpio, 30 degrees in each sign. And next to the sun at 3 degrees of Scorpio, we have Jupiter, and then we have Mercury at 13 degrees of Scorpio. All right. So the sun spends 1 month or 1 month in each sign, and so the sun has just moved into the sign of Scorpio. Jupiter, on the other hand, is the first of the large gas giants, and Jupiter takes 12 years to go all the way around the sun, which means that it spends about 1 year in each sign. Jupiter in astrology is the planet that has to do with magnification. It's the big planet. Jupiter is expansive. It's a gas giant. Jupiter is about bigger and better and more. Jupiter it's considered to be a good planet, although too much of a good thing will kill you. Sugar, is wonderful. it tastes sweet, but too much of it will, in fact, kill you. In fact, too much of almost anything good, will be eventually toxic. So Jupiter isn't just a good planet. However, it magnifies, it amplifies wherever it is in the zodiac in individual charts. For the past year, Jupiter has been in the sign of Libra, magnifying, bringing attention to relationships in general. And here I don't only mean romantic relationships or marriage relationships. I mean every kind of relationship. Things are seen in harmony or out of harmony with something else. And Libra being the sign of the scales or the balance, Libra looks to kind of relate me to you, it to that, up to down, good to evil. And so Libra, in a way, when Jupiter was in Libra, we spent our time trying to establish relationships. Last month, or actually the beginning of October, Jupiter moved from Libra into Scorpio, where it will be until next November, 2018. Scorpio, which is the time of year, so we get a double dose now of Scorpio, because not only has the sun moved into Scorpio over the past few days, but Jupiter in Scorpio puts this huge magnifying lens on Scorpio stuff. And Jupiter will be there all year, but it will only be 1 month while the sun is in the same sign as Jupiter. And in fact, the sun will actually line up with Jupiter. We're going here an hour at a time. Let's shift this to, hang on a second here. Let's move this a day at a time. So here we have on October 26th, that would be tomorrow, we have Jupiter and the sun at the same degree in Scorpio. Now, this is considered to be astrologically a good day. Why? Because Jupiter is a happy-go-lucky, philandering, beneficent, bumbling, kind of do-gooder. Now, in mythology, Jupiter was the king of all the gods and goddesses in Olympus. And he meant well, but he occasionally did stupid things. Among the things that Jupiter did, Jupiter was married to Juno. Juno was the faithful wife. Meanwhile, Jupiter was a guy. And we'll get back to this one in a minute, because this is a lot of what we got to talk about tonight. So Jupiter wasn't necessarily faithful. In fact, Jupiter seemed to have little excursions with women, with young women, with boys, with young boys, okay, with goats, with whatever. And Juno, his wife, always took him back, and it was okay. Now, granted, she did change a couple of young females into ogres and animals and goats just to get even. I mean, she was a goddess. But the fact is that she was faithful and he was not. Now, we have Jupiter now moving into Scorpio. Scorpio is one of the least understood signs. In fact, it's my sense that all the feminine, and I say feminine in astrology, this isn't about gender, it's about yang, outgoing, yin, indrawing. It's sometimes called masculine and feminine, but it's the yin-yang polarity. And the feminine signs, starting with Virgo, tend to be misunderstood. Why? Because astrology largely was written by guys about guys. I mean, astrology was kept alive, through the tradition of the monasteries. We think of the church being against astrology, but the fact of the matter is that most of the mathematical tools that we have in astrology for dividing up the sky into houses, for example, some of these tools are called, or systems are called Porphyry, Regimontanus, Marinus, Placidus. There's about 30 of them. And most of them are named after monks. Why? Because they're the ones that figured these systems out. So you have guys judging signs that are in a feminine polarity, and I don't think they often get it right. We'll come back to that in a moment. So we have Scorpio, which is often associated with sexuality. The problem is that Scorpio is way more than and slightly different than sexuality. In fact, there's a mythology around Scorpio. You go into a group of people and you say someone says, I'm a Scorpio, and if they're astrologers, 3 out of the 4 of them will go, ooh. Scorpio, it's a secretive sign. Why? Because when a Scorpio tells everything, it usually scares the crap out of the people around. So Scorpios learn to hold energy in. In fact, there's a power in Scorpio that has to do with the power of the hidden. So, we have Jupiter moving into Scorpio. By the way, this time of year when the sun moves into Scorpio, this is the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of the time of year when the leaves, instead of in Libra, when they were beautiful and pretty colored and so on, the sun moves into Scorpio and the leaves are dead. They get nipped at the bud and they fall from the tree, and the action now is internalized. You can't see the magic once the tree leaves are dead, because the real mojo is happening deep internal inside. And whatever that magic is, the beginning of the magic that Scorpio is a gateway to, is the magic of transformation that leads eventually to it's obvious it's spring and everything is anew. But although Aries gets the credit for it being new, the fact of the matter is that it's the end of the previous that's the beginning of the new cycle. It just happens in areas that are not perceptible. You with me here? All right. So, when Jupiter moved into Scorpio back at the beginning of October, we astrologers, and I talked about this last month, we talked about how Jupiter in Scorpio would bring out hidden stuff. Stuff related to what? Power, sexuality, death, hidden things in general. Well, we've gotten a fair dose of this already, and I want to talk about some of the things specifically, not because they've already gone on, but because they're part of something that will be continuing. And my editor, Morgan Friday, told me that, and she reminded me of this a few times in the past couple of weeks, that Jupiter, because we were talking about some of these events, and she said, Jupiter in a sign, Jupiter in Scorpio, is not about an event. It's a journey. We're on a one-year journey that has already begun. And it began with a cataclysm of events. And I think where we need to start, although we could start about abuse of power, we could start talking about, floods and fires and the inability of the system to respond in a way that is helpful. We could talk about a lot of things, but I want to talk about sexuality, because that is part of what the Scorpio energy is. But again, I said earlier, people misunderstand Scorpio. It's likely the sexiest sign in the zodiac is not Scorpio. It's likely Capricorn. And people go, what? Capricorns are repressed. They're workaholics. Well, yes, because the culture in which we live is repressive or suppressive around those issues. The ultimate Capricorn mythological creature is Pan. We'll come back to this in a month or two when the sun moves into Capricorn. But, Pan was a totally playful, sexually charged being until Christianity made that stuff all be bad. In which case Pan fell from the mountain of glory into this kind of despicable, creature that was a smelly goat rather than capricious. The word capricious means goat-like, Capricorn. Capricious means goat-like. And it doesn't mean solemn and hard-working, it means spontaneously playful. So Capricorn actually is about sex. It's about sex play. Scorpio, although it's associated with sex, is more about the power dynamic of sexuality, because there's ownership and possession. We'll come back to that in a moment. And it's also about intimacy. Now, certainly, sexuality can be a side product, can be a part of intimacy, but one can have sexuality without intimacy. In fact, I think in our culture, sex is often a way in which intimacy is avoided. That's another discussion. But we can have sex without intimacy, and we can have intimacy without sex. But I think Scorpio is the junction between the two of them. Now here's the other piece, and that is that we live in a male-dominated society. All you need to do is look at the room of privileged old white guys making laws about women's bodies. I mean, do I have to go here? I do. Because this is part of what Jupiter in Scorpio is all about. And we've gotten a first taste of it over this last month already. But mark my words, this ain't the issue. No, it is the issue, but this isn't the event. This is just the first steps on this journey. And it's not even the first steps on this journey, because this journey has been going on for millennia. And we can touch there, we could talk about this for a long time. But this is the astrology of this month, because not only is Jupiter in Scorpio, but for most of this month, the sun is in Scorpio too. And also we have Mercury in Scorpio for part of the month. And then we have Venus moving into Scorpio Venus moves into Scorpio. Where did that go? Venus moves into Scorpio on November 7th. And then we have Mars also moving into Scorpio, but not until next month. Now, the thing is here, within days of the Jupiter moving into Scorpio, a few events occurred. One is Hugh Hefner died. Hugh Hefner was a larger than life, not larger than death. I don't know how to talk about these things. I'm not quite sure how it works. But Hugh Hefner was a cultural icon for better and for worse for many years. There's been a lot written about him recently because on one level, this man was an absolute, I don't want to say despicable, but he was an example of the worst traits of the male use of sexuality as a power and a dynamic and a worship of and setting up a culture that basically worshipped beauty over wisdom and brains and spirit, let's say. Now, there's been a lot written on Hugh Hefner because his magazine and his foundation through the 60s and early 70s also issued Friends of Court submissions and issues on freedom of the press and on abortion and abortion rights and all of this stuff. And that may be true, but we need to look at what his motives were because he was building an empire. Now, I don't want to get into the good guy, bad guy thing on Hugh Hefner. It's out there. I'm not an apologist for anything that he did on any level. I'm just saying that Hugh Hefner is an example where many people make a case of, well, this was okay, this was someone who did good, who had a negative side. I want to hold that thought for a moment, because I don't think that works anymore. Then we look at someone like Bill Clinton, who also many people think, and again, politics is tricky, and I know that as soon as I bring up politics on any level, the YouTube channel, once this is posted, will go crazy with people trying to divide rather than to find common ground. But regardless of what you individually think of Bill Clinton, here's another example of someone who may have done some good and yet also seemed to have issues that were not on some level a whole lot different than many men who find themselves in positions of power, including even JFK, including even, dare I say it, Martin Luther King. It seems to be part of what that structure is. But we take someone like Bill Clinton and Hugh Hefner, and we basically see their icky, dark, unacceptable side, and yet many people say, yes, but they did good. Then we look at someone like Harvey Weinstein. Now, this is really problematic because even though he maybe produced a lot of awesome movies, the fact of the matter was he's taken whatever some of this negative stuff was and taken it to another level. Perhaps. I say perhaps, I don't mean to make his stuff any lighter, I mean to make everyone else's stuff heavier. We look at Harvey Weinstein, who basically has been shamed, and rightfully so, and kicked out of the Motion Picture Academy and his own company, rightfully so. And then we look at someone like Bill Cosby, who was another icon of family values and so on, and has basically fallen from grace. And we say, yes, these people deserve it. And then we look at Donald Trump and we say, yeah, but we elected him president. Now, this is not a political, well, sure, everything is political. But I'm not here talking about the politics of a person. I'm talking about how we as a culture take a look at someone and go, that same behavior in that person is okay, but in that person it's not. And I have struggled with this over the past few weeks, and I hope everyone else has too, because most of us are not as clean as we would like to be in the forgiving of one person because we think they were doing good things, and yet a total trashing of another person. Now, I need to talk for a moment about this whole male bias and power thing, and this is all Jupiter in Scorpio. I mean, for those of you who think I'm not doing astrology, this is the astrology of Jupiter in Scorpio. It's taking that magnifying lens and holding it over this area that is hidden and has now come out into the light. And it's come out into the light and it ain't going away. So we have this idea that people have come out, most people have come out absolutely down on Harvey Weinstein and what we've learned about him and what many people apparently have known about him. And we come across last week a statement made by Woody Allen, who should have just shut the fuck up. But Woody Allen basically said that he didn't know about some of this stuff and that Harvey Weinstein was a friend of his and that he just hopes this doesn't turn into a witch hunt. And all of a sudden, the antenna goes up. Witch hunt. And here's what we need to talk about. There was an article in the New York Times last week. You can find it online. I recommend reading it. You can Google New York Times. Lindy West is the writer. But if you Google Witch Hunt New York Times, this article will appear in the Google search. And the headline of this article says, yes, Woody, okay, it doesn't say Woody, but I've just added that. Yes, Woody, this is a witch hunt. I am a witch, and I'm hunting for you. Now, there is a shift in the power dynamic that we need to pay attention to. This is huge. This is powerful. This is a witch hunt. But it's now the witches that are hunting rather than hunted. Now let's take a look at the word witch. You may or may not know this. Until the 16th century, that would be the 1500s, the word witch was not gender specific. Didn't matter what sex organs you happened to wear in this lifetime. If you had magical mojo, you were considered to be a witch. However, another thing that you might not know, and I reference one amongst many books, a book by Gene Achterberg. Again, I'll post the name and the name of the book down below here. This is available on Amazon. She's written many books, but Gene Achterberg's book called Woman as Healer. Now, does anyone know that book? A few people? All right, it's a stunning book because it actually is an academic history and then a discussion of the current state. But in it, Gene Achterberg, with amazing academic references, talks about the Inquisition. Do you know what the Inquisition was? You know, we think of the Spanish Inquisition. When most people hear Inquisition, that's what comes into mind. And this is the church basically going into Moorish Spain after the Moors have been kicked out, and basically torturing people who are, believed to either be Arab or Arabic, Muslim, or Jewish in particular. But the Inquisition through the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries came and went under many different guises. The German Inquisition, which came through mostly up from the south and through Germany in the 1500s, that would be in the 16th century, came through with such dynamic force, basically on a witch hunt, but it did this with such intensity that there were villages that after the Inquisition came through, there were no women living in the village. Did you know that? That conservative estimates say a couple 100,000 women were killed during these inquisitions. There are estimates, though, that this is a male written history and that perhaps hundreds of thousands, if not a million women were killed as witches during this time. So witch became associated with a feminine energy which had to do with power and wisdom. The word witch historically is the same etymological derivation as Wicca, which is W-I-C-C-A, or Wicca, or Wicca, which is W-I-C-C-E, which was not masculine or feminine, and it actually it means wise. It comes from the word meaning wise, witch. But the female witch immediately became denigrated by the male power structure. In fact, a female witch technically is a hag, not a nice word. Whereas the male witches all of a sudden weren't considered to be so bad. They were wizards, warlocks, sorcerers, etc. And on some level, I would like to think that I am in that proud tradition of wizardry. All right, so I'm trying to paint a picture here that is bringing us up to what's going on now, because we have this systemic suppression of feminine energy that has to do with the maintenance of the male-dominated patriarchal society, where a bunch of white guys who have money can make laws about what a woman should or shouldn't do with her body. I'm going to keep coming back to that because this is the underlying problem. And here we're talking about whether it's health-related or whether it's birth-related. You know, the idea of the power of the human body and that power of generation regeneration freaked the hell out of the church. You know, to the extent that women couldn't even become priests, still can't. So I want to look at one other example of this negative, the covering of the power of women during this time. That is a Halloween story that I like to tell every year because most people don't have a clue about this. So we are coming up to that time of year that in the pagan calendar is called Samhain. In the Christian co-option of the pagan holidays, which Christianity did very well, the co-option of Samhain is what we call All Saints' Day or Halloween or the Day of the Dead. But it's a time of year when, even before Christianity, people seemed to know that the veil between the worlds was thin. And that's why we have ghosts and goblins and spirits and spirit guides and things that go bump in the night coming through during this time of year. However, we have images that are tied up with this holiday that are very powerful and have to do with this male-dominated cover-up of feminine power. And here I want to talk about witches riding broomsticks. Does anybody know where I'm going with this? Cool. Amazing. See, how do we not know this? All right, so during the time of the 1400s, around the time when the Inquisition was coming through and persecuting women who were wise, women who had power, women who could heal, women who could give birth, women had roles within their lives. And one of the roles that the women had was maintaining the garden. Now, we have gardens today that produce vegetables and food and flowers. The gardens of the Middle Ages, though, had other important pieces. And they had parts of the garden that were dark, that were what we would call a compost pile that we may put somewhere else. But this is where the old and decayed organic matter is basically regenerated into life-giving earth. And at this part of the garden, there were certain things that grew like mushrooms, which were very important pieces of the witches' job of keeping the garden going. It wasn't just about making the pretty flowers, it was also about growing the herbs that had to do with altered states of consciousness and of altered physical and metaphysical being, so that things like belladonna, which were grown in every garden, which can be a poison in volume, was also a heart stimulant and a visionary drug that would put someone into a state of consciousness. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, but those are belladonna visions, not particularly pretty. But also in the mushroom section, there were things like amanitas, which were magical, psychedelic, journeying mushrooms. So, here we had witches growing these magical things in their garden. And the question became, how did they take them? And the fact of the matter is, the most efficient way for a woman gardener to ingest some of these magical, psychedelic, metaphysical, journeying drugs was to take it as a suppository, vaginally, with a broomstick. Now, I'm not making any of this up. Did you ever wonder why witches flew through the heavens on a broomstick? You now know. You can Google this and you can find woodcuts and references and old 14th and 15th century references to this. This isn't just some modern male fantasy. This is how they got off. Literally. And yet the male history has totally suppressed this. And I'm suggesting this is part of the same issue. It's a very different slant on it, but it is the identical same issue. Because we have this whole thing of women, power, sexuality, transformation of Scorpio, the death and regeneration, the death and giving birth, which only a woman's body can do, and all of this is about Jupiter in Scorpio. So I think here we've passed through a little bit of a gate. And I read somewhere, I think maybe I even have, I saved this if I can find this real quickly. Yes. So Woody Allen said, this whole Harvey Weinstein thing this is a quote, is very sad for everybody involved, which we can stop right there, because that's like saying that the white supremacists that marched in Charlottesville were nice people. This is not nice. This is not sad for everybody involved. It's sad for the victims. It's not sad for the victimized male, in this particular situation. Mr. Allen said, quote, "Tragic for the poor women that were involved, sad for Harvey that his life is so messed up." No, anyhow. So, Mr. Allen also cautioned about rushing to judgment. Quote, "You don't want it to lead to a witch hunt atmosphere, a Salem atmosphere where every guy in an office who winks at a woman is suddenly having to call a lawyer to defend himself. That's not right either." Well, unfortunately, Mr. Allen, it is now right. That the energy has changed. And I'm a guy. I can't say that I look back at my life and I'm completely clean. I mean, I can't even fathom, stepping over someone's boundaries in the way that some of these people have. That's not what I'm admitting here, too. But I'm admitting here, me too, in as much as it's not about Hugh Hefner, Weinstein, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump. You see, Jupiter moved into Scorpio, but Scorpio's modern ruling planet is Pluto, and Pluto is in Capricorn, and this is a systemic structure of society that before our eyes right now is melting down. And everyone needs to say, I'm on this side of it or that side of it. There is no, well, it's okay to go 70%, but to still think that this is okay. No, guys, this is now about asking permission, and if you don't like it, tough shit. It's like, And in fact, I posted the Jupiter in Scorpio thing on my Facebook page, and I think I can do this from memory. It's a Walter Scott quote, and it says something, "Oh, the wicked web we weave when something we deceive." And this web of deception, this web of justification, it's okay to vote this guy as leader of the world and forget leader of the free world and say, well, he didn't mean it or he was one of the guys. We can no longer do this. It's done. This has now been relegated to like some of the practices of the Middle Ages that we look at and go, holy crap, did people really do that? Well, now we need to look at this and go, wow, did people really do that? And it's a slippery slope. Because although this is personal admission, I've never done anything of the sort like Bill Cosby, or Harvey Weinstein. I've certainly been I don't want to say predator male, but I've certainly participated in male-female interactions that I could justify looking backward at and say, yeah, it was culturally okay and it was acceptable, but it ain't anymore. Done, period. And now I'm kind of stepping off this whole thing. I could go on, and I hope I didn't, bore you to death with this, but I think this is so profound and so powerful, and we see it going on right now. We see the Me Too, hashtag that's hitting the internet, and that this is not just about 30 women here, or 20 women with Bill Clinton, or 25 women with Donald Trump, or it's everyone is impacted by this in some way, whether you're male or female. Because for those males who are in relationship with a female, then they've had this experience too. And so it's important that we get this one right and we figure it out and we move forward. We ain't seen the ending of this because it's a journey, it's not an event. So, into this Jupiter into Scorpio, also within a couple of days of that ingress, we also had the shooting in Las Vegas, which of course is invisible because who the hell cares? It was, only a few hundred people, and that was last week, and now we have other things to think about. And sadly enough, that's where we are in our world. And yet all these things keep coming back and coming back. And with Jupiter moving through Scorpio and Pluto being in Capricorn, we will see more and more of, having to deal with these issues. All right, let me just get back to my notes. Okay. So, having said all that, we are now looking at the month ahead, and we'll see if we can do this in a few minutes. But again, if I had just talked about, the movement of Mercury now in Scorpio, which it is, and Mercury in Scorpio is important because we're communicating about stuff like this. But if I had just talked about that in the new moons and full moons and didn't dig into this other topic, it would have been missing the real issue of what's going on for us culturally, socially, politically, individually at this time. And again, without beating this to death, and death of course is a Scorpio thing, we're going to now move on. So, in November, I think the most important thing that occurs in November is that we have a clustering of planets moving through Scorpio, which again are going to bring up these issues of power. See, Jupiter is also about power. Jupiter is not just about big ideas and philosophy and thoughts and the magnifying lens, but it's a powerhouse. And in Scorpio, it's going to be digging into the hidden, into the unknown, into those realms where we don't normally look. We're going to be uncovering more things. And I think here, with respect to, in astrology, Scorpio is related to the 8th house, which is traditionally the house of sex, death, taxes, and other people's money. Well, we have had since Jupiter moved into Scorpio, none of this is new news, but it's another layer of the level of the money research that's going on from the Special Prosecutor's Office into the handlings of money. And I think with Jupiter in Scorpio, we will see more and more of this come to light in ways that we can't imagine. We're already seeing it, and again, none of this is new. It's just Jupiter's holding the magnifying lens over it, and we're realizing the relationship, and again, many of us have realized this forever, but the relationship between people in government, people in cabinet positions, and the hen houses that the foxes are guarding. And so I think that following the money will become another piece of this Jupiter in Scorpio thing. So we have here, now moving into November, finally, we have Jupiter and the Sun and Mercury in Scorpio. And on November 3rd, we have the Sun in Scorpio forming a harmonious trine. A trine is 1/3 of a circle. All these lines in the middle have to do with the mathematical, geometric relationships that the planets are making with one another. And here we have, on November 2nd, actually it's on the 3rd when it's exact, we have the Sun at 11 degrees of Scorpio, 1/3 of a circle to Neptune at 11 degrees of Pisces. And here we'll see a theme of these planets as they move through Scorpio will kind of support and harmonize with Neptune the illusions, the dreams, the imagination. And so I think as we move through this first week, we will get some of this stuff coming through. And yet at the same time, as the other planets, now Venus and then eventually Mars, move through the end of Libra, they will come opposite Uranus. Last month I talked quite a bit about the dates when planets would square Pluto and oppose Uranus. And we can follow those and see the news events through October and how a lot of the major news stories corresponded, including the Harvey Weinstein thing, including the Las Vegas assassinations, that we can see how those conform to that. But we have on November 3rd, we also have Venus moving opposite Uranus. Now Venus is not only the planet of love, but it's also the planet of money. And so we may see again another wave of disclosures or things coming out that are very disruptive, that have to do with those things coming out into the open as Venus opposes Uranus. But at the same time, with the Sun trining Neptune, we may also kind of see some of that stuff say, oh well, it's just more fake news, or it's buried, or whatever. But November 3rd is a key date because the Sun's trying to Neptune and Venus's opposition to Uranus, and perhaps most importantly, November 3rd or 4th, depending upon where you are on the planet, is a full moon. And that full moon, let's inch this up a couple of hours at a time. There's the moon, let's back it up. There's the moon that is opposite the Sun, the Taurus full moon. That Taurus full moon here on the west coast is at 10:22 p.m. on November 3rd. On the east coast, it's early in the morning on November 4th. But the thing about this full moon is that the full moon in Taurus, the moon likes being in Taurus. Why? Because Taurus is grounded, and the moon always changes. So the full moon in Taurus gives us a place to stand, even amidst all of the change and transformation and upset that's going on. The full moon in Taurus, Taurus is simplicity, Scorpio is complexity. We have this kind of awareness between what we want, what we need. We need a return to the simple life, back to basics. And yet, meanwhile, the Scorpio energy, the complexity, and this whole idea of the imagination, Neptune, harmonizing with this full moon, I think is very important. And on top of that, as we already talked about, that same day, we have Venus opposite Uranus and this explosive nature. Let's look for, but hopefully maybe we won't find, some more major events on the same level of proportion as some of these things that have gone on right around this full moon. We also have during this time, and I talked about this last month, I'm not going to talk about it again, but this is a slow-moving aspect, and this has to do with the trine between Saturn and Uranus, and the square between Saturn and Chiron. This is something that's being held for weeks, and even though it's beginning to dissipate, the exact Saturn-Chiron square is on November 2nd. And again, Saturn is about structure. It's the things that we can't change. Chiron is the wound. It's the healing that we are going through. And with Saturn and Uranus, Saturn is the structure that doesn't change. It's the authority. Uranus is the sudden change anyhow. And we may be seeing this continuing to work through the month, where we are actually getting the inklings of whatever the bigger changes are that may still take weeks or even months to unfold. And I say that thinking that a year ago I was saying, oh, this will take a few months to unfold, and we're now, you know, a full year into this toddlerocracy. Anyhow, so that the third and last Saturn trine Uranus, oh, I mistakenly said it happened. The third and last exact trine of this occurs on November 11th. Now, I'm not one for prediction, because I think the universe is plastic, and I don't mean artificial, I mean moldable. But I think that the last time, these slow-moving outer transits occur often in threes because of the relative motion of the Earth going around inside them. And Saturn, the planet of structure, was trined by Uranus, the planet of sudden change, back in May, within 24 hours of the special prosecutor being appointed. And I said then that let's look at when the third and final one of these occur, which is on November 11th, let's look for a major movement around this story. Now, we may be there, it may not be. There may be major movement around this that doesn't even come out in the media for weeks or months. But I'm just putting that, as Rachel Maddow would say, I'm putting a pin in that, because I think that this first part of November, leading through the middle of the month, in many ways, astrologically, does tie back to that period in May when Mueller was appointed as a special prosecutor. November 13th, we're going to just jump ahead and hit a couple of these. Let's go back here to, all right, come on, there we go, a day at a time. And so we're going to jump to November 13th, and on the 13th we have Venus conjuncting Jupiter. Remember, just we just had the Sun conjuncting Jupiter, but now Venus, which has moved into Scorpio. I don't think I said this, or I maybe said it in passing, but Venus, where'd she go? There it is. Venus enters Scorpio on November 7th. Another layer of that intensity, the deepening. I imagine these issues of male abuse of power and sexuality may come out with another round of stories. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in this, that through some legal action or something, that all the alleged hidden tapes from Apprentice, which, you know, have been buried, that they may come out, but something may. But Venus moves into Scorpio on November 7th, and then by November 13th it catches up with Jupiter. And again, we see another round of this enough, too much, more coming out. On a personal note, you know, Jupiter conjuncting Venus, it's a sweet, magical time, because if we have some, this is, if you have an event, this is a Monday, But that Saturday and Sunday would be a time where if I had the choice of making something lovely or wonderful happening, going to a concert, going out on a date, having a party or a bunch of friends over for dinner, I would use this aspect to take advantage of that, because it's going to amp up that energy of Venus, love, beauty, sweetness, Jupiter, indulgence. The only thing to watch out for is what happens when you go over the line. So if you're into drinking fine wine, great, but don't go to the point where someone's scraping you up either off the floor or off the edge of the road. That's November 13th. When Venus conjuncts Jupiter, again Neptune is involved, because Mercury at the same time, Mercury in Sagittarius is squaring Neptune. A word about Mercury in Sagittarius. Mercury enters Sagittarius on November 5th. Normally Mercury spends about two and a half weeks in a sign, because Mercury is the fastest moving of all the quote-unquote real planets. I say real planets meaning, beyond the sun and the moon. So Mercury normally spends a couple weeks in a sign, but as we know, 3 times a year Mercury, from Earth's point of view, stops in his tracks and goes backwards. Mercury retrograde. This is an optical illusion or an optical reality, but we'll talk more about that next month, because Mercury, which spends, a couple of weeks in Scorpio, Mercury moves into Sagittarius on November 5th, and it stays there for over 2 months. Why? Because Mercury gets to the very end of Sagittarius. It's at 27 degrees of Sagittarius by the end of this month, November, and then the beginning of December it turns retrograde. It doesn't retrograde back into the previous sign. It spends its 3 weeks of retrograde in Sagittarius, and then it spends another several weeks just getting back to where it was originally when it turned retrograde. We'll talk more about this next month. I'm only throwing the idea out there that those aspects that Mercury makes while it's moving through Sagittarius normally happen over the course of a day or two. This time round, some of these will be repeated again over the course of the next weeks, which create a different level of intensity. So we have on the 13th, we have Mercury forming, we have Mercury at 11 degrees of Sagittarius making a 90-degree angle with Neptune, and the 90-degree angle is one of conflict. Mercury is logic and rational, Neptune is dreamy and imagination. So what happens when logic meets imagination? Well, it's difficult, because we think we may know what's going on, but we don't. Or we try to write a technical manual and we end up writing a poem. I'm using that metaphorically, because the fact of the matter is that the rational and the irrational, both of which have important functions at this point in time, are a little bit of conflict. And again, we might look at this point in time, again in the news, seeing something that comes out that's obviously a lie or obviously an untruth, since I think it's Flake, who, the senator from Arizona, who said, "I grew up not using the L word," and the interviewer said, "But is Trump lying?" And he goes, "Well, he's not telling the truth." All right. So that's on the 13th. By the 16th, Venus moves into the spot where it trines Neptune. Let's move this ahead a couple of days. And now we can see Venus at that 11-degree point trining Neptune. And again, from a standpoint of love, of loveliness, as long as we don't get confused by what's real and what's not real, this is a great day to participate in the arts, in things of beauty, whether it's eating a good meal, or whether it's drawing a painting, or whether it's going to a museum, or listening to music, or just having discussions with someone you love. This is a magical, or can be a magical period of time. That's the 16th, when that Venus is trining Neptune. We move on, and the next thing that we want to hit is the new moon on the 18th. And, we went past it. There it is right there. Let's back that up a few hours. And there is the new moon on the 18th. The new moon actually occurs at 3:42 a.m. here in Seattle. And it is at the tail end of Scorpio. But look here, we have the Sun, the Moon, and Venus and Jupiter all clustered in Scorpio. This again is a powerful new moon because again, every new moon plants a seed. Every new moon is the start of a new cycle. And this cycle is the cycle of that which is hidden. So we have an important period of time here where we can go down, go deep, go inside, and yet it's not just staying there, it's looking at the future and planting those seeds that will come to fruition later on. And the first round of fruition is actually 2 weeks later when we have the full moon that will be in Gemini because the sun will have moved on into Sagittarius. This new moon in Scorpio is also important because Mars at this time, and again I come back to last month's talk when I spent a lot of time talking about the now waning square of Uranus to Pluto, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which defined the 60s, the Uranus-Pluto square, which was exact from 2012 to 2015 in and out of phase. But these are so slow-moving and cultural in their impact that their influence lasts for years afterwards. The exact Uranus-Pluto conjunction was in 1965 and 66, and we were still feeling it in 68, 69, 70, 71. And in fact, I failed to mention at the beginning, I'm going to mention now, that I have a full-length article in the next issue of the Mountain Astrologer on the astrology of 2018, but in it I talk about this Uranus-Pluto square that is technically already waning, meaning Uranus moves faster than Pluto. So a few years ago, Uranus was at the exact same degree, 17, while Pluto was at 17. Now Uranus is moving away from that, but the rhythm, the hum, the patterns that were set up from 2012 to 2015 will still be unfolding and magnifying for another several years. And that's what we're seeing. And every time a faster moving planet comes through and squares or opposes, makes a hard angle with Pluto and or Uranus, that will re-stimulate all those same events again. And you can look back over the last 2 or 3 years and see this like clockwork. In my article on the Mountain Astrologer, I look at the whole unfolding and all the key dates of the Vietnam War and of Watergate, and I tie those to the incredible exactness of planets making aspects to the point at where the Uranus-Pluto conjunction was in 65 and 66. It's crazy. I mean, if one set out to make this shit up, one couldn't make it up as good or as impressive as it is when one begins to do the research and dig into it. Anyhow, the significant thing here is that during this new moon on November 18th, Mars, which is a fairly slow-moving, but it's still considered an inner planet. It's outside of Earth, but it kind of moves along, at a faster clip. The distance from Mars to Jupiter is large. The distance from Mercury to Venus, Venus to Earth, and Earth to Mars, although it's large, is minuscule compared to the jump out to Jupiter. And so Mars actually on the 18th, actually it's on the 19th when it does this, Mars, we're back to moving by hours, let's move this by days again. Mars actually makes that square to Pluto. It will make an opposition to Uranus in December, and again here, this date, the new moon around the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th, again, personally in our lives, and politically, globally, we will see crazy shit happening all over the place again. But this is less Uranian, meaning sudden, unexpected, as much as it is deep stuff coming up. Why do I say deep stuff? It's Pluto. Pluto is the lord of the underworld. It's the shadow realms. It's the hidden. Mars and Pluto, incidentally, are the traditional planet associated with Scorpio, Mars, and the modern planet. Pluto was only discovered in the 1930s, but Pluto is associated with Scorpio also. So we have here the new moon in Scorpio, with Jupiter in Scorpio, with Venus in Scorpio, and we have Scorpio's two key planets, Mars and Pluto, 90 degrees to one another, and this, I think, will be an incredibly difficult few days. So in your own personal life, what do you do with this energy? You may, well, staying home, you can't hide. You can't hide from this. If we go into denial, it just is even stronger. That which we resist will persist, Carl Jung. That which we deny, that which we hide, in the underworld, it gains power. In the underworld and unconscious are interchangeable words. In the unconscious, things that are hidden begin to gain more power. The thing is that we don't have to act on everything that we uncover and that we feel, but when Mars is square to Pluto, you know, if you feel like you've been wronged and you want to hurt someone, it's important to get it all out and to get it down, but it's not necessarily important to hurt that person back. That perpetuates the energy. Now, I'm not saying that there's never a reason for self-defense. I'm not going there at all. I'm just saying that when you have an aspect like this that's so strong around the 18th and 19th, one of the advantages of knowing astrology is to just be able to be aware of what's going on. You know, if you know it's going to freeze, you can take in your plants overnight. Doesn't mean that it won't freeze, it just means that you'll be able to do some protection around it. So these are days when we need to do our individual protection. That's the 18th and 19th. On the 21st, the Sun moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius. It will be followed eventually by Venus and then by Mars way behind, which has yet to move into Scorpio and then into Sagittarius. And it will be followed by Jupiter next November, because Jupiter will spend the entire year in Scorpio, remember. So the Sun's movement into Sagittarius, though, is like a fresh of breath air. It's like, because Scorpio is intense, it's powerful, it's down and dirty and internal, it's jealousy, it's suspicion, it's the research that unearths and hides those things which were buried, whether they were actually buried in the backyard or just buried in your memory. And so when the Sun moves into Sagittarius, rather than being the scorpion with its poison in its tail, rather than being the scorpion, Sagittarius is the archer that's aiming its thoughts, its ideas towards the heaven. We reach outward, we reach upward. The holiday of Sagittarius is Thanksgiving. Now, here's the weird thing. Thanksgiving is a Sagittarian holiday. Sagittarius basically is about foreign travel. It's about going great distances. It's about philosophy. It's about high ideals. Sagittarius is aspiring upward. The Europeans came across the ocean in search of religious freedom. Religious freedom is a Sagittarius idea. They were welcomed by the natives, they were fed, they celebrated this thing of great fellowship, and all of this is so Sagittarian, including the fact that it's a lie. Now, when I say it's a lie, it means that the downside of Sagittarius is that we forget about the shadow. We forget about Scorpio. All of a sudden, everything that was hidden is out in the open. It's all cool, and we forget the fact that that the Europeans weren't really all that nice, to the Native Americans, and we forget that that Columbus and the Europeans didn't really discover the New World. It was doing fine without us. And so on and so on and so on. So this idea of Thanksgiving really is a wonderful Sagittarius holiday, but here's where it gets weird, and again, you can't make it up this good, because, you know, the days of the week relate to the planets. You know, Moon Day, Sun Day, Mars Day. In the romantic languages, it's more obvious. But Thor's Day, Thor is in effect the Norwegian or the Scandinavian version of Jupiter. So Thor's Day, or Jueves, how do you say it in French or Spanish? Jueves, yeah. So this is Jupiter's day. So Jupiter is the planet that is associated with Sagittarius. So on the first Jupiter's day, after the Sun moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius, we celebrate this day of inspiration and good fellowship that we call Giving Thanks Day. Pretty crazy, huh? It's on a Thursday. It's on Jupiter's day, once the Sun has moved into the sign of Jupiter. All right, so we get up to Thanksgiving. On November 22nd, however, Neptune turns direct. The outer planets spend almost half the year, a third to a half the year retrograde. But there's a bit of an emphasis here on our dreams coming real toward the end of the month. We also have, and I'm just cherry picking a couple of things here, on the 25th, we have Mercury forming a trine with Uranus. This is new ideas coming into light. This is a great time if you're doing a paper, if you're writing, if you're doing some sort of intellectual work, if you want to have friends over and have discussions. This is a great time for kind of having the mind freed from emotion, being able to explore. That's November 25th. And then on the 27th, the last thing we will talk about is Mercury, now moving toward the end of Sagittarius. Mercury reaches the end of Sagittarius, lines up with Saturn, and then a couple of days later, it passes Saturn, and then hits that last degree of Sagittarius, not 29 degrees, and watch, it turns retrograde, and it starts backing up 26. Can you see what happens? Saturn, on the other hand, in December, leaves its 2.5 years in Sagittarius, moves into Capricorn. This is going to be a main part of our theme next month, because in December, Saturn moves into Capricorn. But on the last days of the month, mental, communicator, intellectual Mercury lines up with Saturn. And it's like it hits a wall. Saturn says, make it real. In Sagittarius, Mercury is kind of coming through this period of time of kind of thinking big things. It's going to be okay, philosophical ideas, big grandiose thinking, no walls, no shadows, all cool, and boom, it hits Saturn, and Saturn says, not on your fucking life. Jeff used to say, Saturn is the planet that says no, it means yes. And even prior to this environment, this new environment that we now live in, I always used to have to say, well, he doesn't mean on a date. He means, and I'm talking as if he's here, many of you know that Jeff was my astrology buddy, partner, who passed away from lung cancer a couple years ago. And Jeff's insight was very brilliant. But Jeff's idea that Saturn is the planet that says no and means yes is that often Saturn is restriction. Saturn says you can't think this thought anymore. It doesn't work. And it's not that Saturn is preventing you from getting there. What Saturn is doing is it's sending you back to the drawing board so you can make it better, so you can get it right. Because Saturn is interested in endurance, in persistence, in longevity. And so what we get here at the end of November is we may find ourselves bumping into old ghosts and demons, and we may find ourselves kind of having trouble with some new idea, and we can't take it any further. Meanwhile, Saturn moves on into Capricorn, but we have to go back as Mercury turns retrograde and rethink all of this stuff through. Oddly enough, by the next time that Mercury conjuncts Saturn just a few weeks later, it will be in the sign of Capricorn rather than Sagittarius. So, that's the short dance through the month of November. And again, I think that just as a moment of review, it's important for us to be willing to acknowledge that we're standing at a threshold. No, we're not standing at a threshold. We're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. We're standing at the edge of an abyss. That abyss is the scorpionic plunge into the darkness, into the unknown, down the rabbit hole, if you will. We don't know where it's going to take us, but it doesn't matter. It's going to take us. And what we need to do is we need to go there in a way that is open-minded, because we all have something to learn. I don't care which side of the gender issue, or for that matter, because gender is more complex than side. I don't care where you stand in the gender spectrum. This is not about Me Too only being a woman's issue. It's an everyone's issue. In fact, I saw a wonderful thing that was kind of a statement on the Me Too campaign, and that is an I believe you. You know, we all have work to do on this. I don't care how either victimized or victimizing you've been, or how unvictimized and healthy you feel on either side of the spectrum. This isn't an issue about this person or that person or about that person. We all have our shit in this. And we all have our shit in this, again, whether we've ever stepped over someone's boundaries like Harvey Weinstein or Donald Trump or Bill Clinton or Bill Cosby or Joe Blow or whomever. Whether we've ever done that or not it's not as simple as that. It's the entire relationship issue and the willingness to look at our individual shadows and how our actions may have in fact created hurt or pain or suffering to someone where it wasn't our intent. At one point in time, I think it was good enough to say I didn't mean doing that. And that doesn't cut it anymore. We need to change our behavior. Enough said. I found myself back on the soapbox. I really don't mean to go there, but I really do think it's that important. You know, here we go. It's Halloween. The veil is thin. You know, enjoy kind of going into that realm where having a body isn't the only way to live. You know, we can crisscross back and forth from the physical to the metaphysical, and that's also part of this Jupiter in Scorpio, is becoming more and more aware of that. Thank you all. Have a good month. See you the last Wednesday night of next month around Thanksgiving time. I think it's actually the few days after Thanksgiving, and we will see you next month. Thank you.